The Excruiser all-terrain board is an absolute beast, but it has one serious flaw that you should know about if you're considering picking this board up. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Sam. I'm an e-skate enthusiast. Quick disclosure, Excruiser did send over this all-terrain board for review, but they have not paid me and they in no way have any say over what I'm going to say in this video. All right, let's get started. First, let's talk about power and acceleration. I weigh about 190 pounds, so generally I get a worse top speed and range than manufacturers claim because I'm heavier, so that makes sense. Excruiser claims a top speed of about 28 miles per hour, and in my testing, I can get around 26, maybe 27 on a slight downhill, so that seems just about right according to their claims. I'm good with it. There are also 4 riding modes, and I found modes 1 through 3 to be very similar, and honestly, not that useful. Every new board I try, I start on mode 1, and I found I'd get stuck on even the smallest of uphills on mode 1 and 2. It doesn't really matter though, you can just bump it into mode 4, get the maximum speed and acceleration, and you're gonna have a good time. This board is belt driven, as are almost all all-terrain boards, which makes it easy to put on whatever wheels you like, but unlike most belt-driven boards, these motors are quiet. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but at full throttle, the motors are significantly quieter than other belt-driven boards that I've tested. The throttle control on your thumb is incredibly smooth and intuitive and doesn't have that jerky feel that some high-powered all-terrain boards and street boards can have. The only part I really didn't like about the motors and acceleration is that when you let off the throttle, the motors apply a pretty significant braking force when the throttle's just in neutral, which causes you to slow down, so it doesn't really freewheel. And while you're riding, that's not that big of a deal. You can totally get used to it. You just leave your thumb on the throttle a little bit when you want to cruise. But if you ever wanted to kick push this board, like if you ran out of batteries, you are going to have a miserable time. I tried it and I only kicked for about a half a mile before I decided it's easier to just walk the board than it is to kick it, so keep that in mind. The truck's wheels and bearings feel absolutely amazing. I've ridden quite a few boards at this point and none of them have delivered such a smooth carving and riding experience straight out of the box with no changes made. Hats off to Excruiser on their combination of parts here. It is my favorite part of this board by a mile. The board deck itself is a mix of carbon fiber and maple, and it has very little flex because of that carbon fiber, which usually makes the ride uncomfortable, at least it has on other boards, but because of the big wheels and thick foam style grip tape, bumps and road vibrations are zero issue on this board. It's also concave, which really helps your feet stick in place and makes you feel secure, although I found after riding only a few miles, my feet get tired faster than with other flatter boards. The remote is a very standard and well-proven remote. I have the exact same remote on one of my backfire boards, but one thing I really like about this remote and ESC is that when you turn the remote on, it automatically turns the board on. You don't need to push it, you don't need to kick it, you don't need to push a button. You just turn on the remote and the board turns on, so that's a nice feature. The board is pretty long, so unless you're really tall, you're not going to be able to carry it one-handed without lifting your arm up, and that's fine. That's to be expected with almost all all-terrain boards. But one thing I didn't like about this board is that when you pick it up, you're going to hit the motors on the back, which is also normal for all-terrain boards. But the motor guards on this board in particular are tiny, so you'll find yourself, if you're picking it up, especially on concrete, you'll grind the motors on the ground. Now, I reached out to Excruiser and said, why doesn't this have a bigger motor guard? And they said they thought about that, but to save cost and weight, they actually built the motor casings out of stainless steel so that even if they get ground on, they're not going to cause damage to the motors. I don't know if that's true or not. I would have preferred bigger motor guards, but they said they did cover it, so take that with a grain of salt. The board feels well put together, but it lacks the fit and finish of a more premium brand. This part actually worries me a little bit because build quality is one of those things where at first all the boards feel great, but over time the actual build quality of the board determines how it's going to age and how it's going to hold up in the future. And this board's build just doesn't reassure me that it's going to age super well. That being said, everything feels solid. It just doesn't have the level of fit and finish that you might expect from something like a Backfire Zealot or a Meepo Voyager. Excruiser advertises 25 miles of range, and that would be a solid performance in this price bracket, but unfortunately, according to my testing, that is nowhere near realistic. Lots of things affect range, like the rider's weight, the speed you're going, how often you brake and accelerate, how hard you accelerate, the temperature, the motors, the wheels. There are a ton of different factors at play here. And for your reference, like I said earlier, I weigh about 190 pounds, and in my range testing, I generally ride around 20 miles per hour with a few starts and stops, but mostly it's on flat ground. My first range test, I only got 10 miles, which is less than half of what they're advertising it. So I double checked the tire pressure, the belt tension, and the charger to make sure nothing was messing up the result, but then I tested it again and again, and I got the same results. I've put over 100 miles on the board at this point, and my average range is about 8 to 10 miles per full charge. This is incredibly disappointing because while I understand that range varies depending on the rider, with every other board that I've done a range test on, I've gotten between 70 and 90% of the advertised range. With this board, I'm getting about 30 to 40%. I know I'm a heavier rider, and I know I ride faster than what would be ideal for getting the best range, but this is a big difference between marketed range and my real world testing, and it's a difference that other manufacturers don't seem to have, making it a real outlier in the range category. And here's another disappointment. As batteries get below half, most boards will experience a sort of performance sag. The acceleration gets worse, the top speed gets worse, and that sort of thing. With this board, that battery sag is especially noticeable because for me, it was kicking in around 5 miles in, or when the battery was at half. While the battery is full, the top speed was 26 miles an hour, and accelerating felt nice and snappy. It was super fun to ride. But with the battery at 50%, the top speed dropped to around 20 miles an hour, and the acceleration was much slower. Then by the time the battery is at 25%, or around 7 miles into your ride, the top speed drops to around 15 and the acceleration is painfully slow. I reached out to the company to see if I was doing something wrong or if there was something faulty with the board, but it seemed as if everything is functioning as intended. So the truth of it is, if you only need 10 miles or so of range, then you're gonna be fine with this board. But if you, like me, find 10 miles limiting, steer clear. This is by far my favorite part of the board. The combination of wide trucks, soft bushings, and big pneumatic wheels make this board so much fun to ride. The carving feels effortless and playful, and I found myself constantly bouncing from side to side with the perfect amount of rebound. And if you have to take sharp corners, because of the bushings and because of the cut-ins on the board itself, you can turn incredibly sharp. This is actually my sharpest turning board, despite it being a pretty long board. The only problem is that when you turn really sharp, like about as sharp as you can, the board will rub on the wheels, and you can see right here where I rubbed some paint off the board because I took a corner really sharp. It still works fine, but as soon as the wheel touches the board, you're gonna get a pretty significant braking motion, and it's probably going to knock you off the board. And then another thing that can happen if you have bigger feet like me is if your toes are hanging off the edge or your heels, when you turn really sharp, your shoe, the toe of your shoe, might rub on the wheel and might do some braking that you didn't mean to do, and that can be kind of unnerving. That's the case with almost all boards. It's just this board can turn so sharp that it's more noticeable on this one than others. If you've only ever ridden on street wheels, switching over to 150mm pneumatic tires is a night and day difference. All the small bumps and cracks in the sidewalk are gone, and it gives you much more of a floating on air feel. Some people don't like it because you get less road feedback, but I absolutely love it. If you want a smooth and secure feeling ride, these wheels are the way to go. That being said, the trade-off is generally that smaller, harder wheels give longer range, and larger, softer wheels give shorter range. So if you wanted to boost this board's range, you could buy smaller wheels, but that's something you have to pay for. But given the lackluster performance of this board's range, it might be a good idea to get some smaller, harder wheels like 90mm street wheels or 110mm street wheels, and then you would get better range at the cost of a slightly rougher riding experience. This board starts at $1,000, but it's currently on sale for $800, and pricing, especially with electric skateboards, is incredibly important because there are tons of good options on the market at this point. And at the $1,000 price range for an all-terrain board, that's generally more on the budget side because all-terrain boards are generally more expensive due to their bigger batteries, bigger wheels, bigger motors, and all that sort of thing. So here's what I gotta say after riding this board for a little over 100 miles. The board itself is great for the price. I love the trucks, I love the bushings, I love the wheels. It's got pretty solid motors which give adequate acceleration. I'm totally happy with it. The only part that I don't like about this board is the range. And unfortunately, range is a very important component when you're talking about electric skateboards. If you're someone that's going to ride this skateboard for 7 miles or less on any given ride, then I think this board is going to be totally great and you're going to have a phenomenal time carving on it, and you can even do some light off-roading if you want. That being said, if you're someone like me who's a bit heavier and rides a bit faster, you're going to get 10 miles or less of range. And that to me is pretty limiting. So I'm gonna say, if your ride is longer than 5 to 7 miles, your daily ride, then I would recommend getting another board. If you have any specific questions about the Excruiser all-terrain board, let me know in the comment section below and I'll try to get to them. Other than that, feel free to subscribe if you want more skateboard reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.